Hello, so in this video I will be unboxing the Negate Constraints Break project file from Insidium's content repository. And as you can see, here's the example of how it's gonna look, or it's supposed to look like. And on the left I have the simulation. So let me close the picture viewer and just run the simulation so you give an idea of what it's gonna look like. So I have no idea how they're making those particles just like hang from the constraints. It might be a setting that I just haven't discovered yet. And it seems that they're using some kind of volume to kind of like scrape off those particles that are just hanging around. Per the name Negate, I'm pretty sure the negate is a synonym of subtraction. So they're using this volume to subtract the particles hanging from those constraints. Just to double check that this simulation works right out of the box, I have cycles for the real-time preview on the right. So let me play it and I'll pause it right there. So yes, we can see that this is working right out of the box. We can see those spheres being spawned at those particles hanging from those constraints, and the negate effect, the subtraction effect, is happening with this volume. The smoke is just sliding through the constraints. You can see there's like dots in here. I wonder if it's also kind of like pulverizing the constraints because they're like in the similar material, but that is pretty much it. The spheres hanging from the constraints, the smoke coming through and just shoving them off, and then they just fall because gravity, right? So let me close real-time preview, go back in the timeline, and I'm gonna deselect the camera view, zoom out a bit just so I can see what the scene looks like. And for now I'm just gonna disable the lighting and environment, go to XP system, disable the icon viewport, and I'm gonna hide the camera. Okay, so the way that I like to deconstruct these simulations is by doing the emitters, and then the questions, the actions, dynamics, modifiers, and at the very end I just like to do the generators, just because those are probably gonna be more heavy on the computing side. We have no dynamics, no groups, we do have emitters, we do have generators, utilities, modifiers, no questions. Now this is actually the first time that I'm dealing with the actions, and in the modifiers I can already see that there's an XP negate, and I'm ready to see how this works. So for now I'm just gonna disable the actions, the modifiers, the utilities, the generators, and just start with the emitters. So I'll disable the second emitter, go to the first one, and we can see that it's just a rectangle. Whoa, how are they sticking? I thought I deactivated everything. Emitting, emitters, group dynamics, what? Utilities? Oh, let me deactivate this utility. Yep, so yeah, it's just a shot of particles. If you go to the emission mode, emission is set to shot. The type is on random. It's about 1,000 particles at a speed of 1,000, variation of 291. Let me just run that up to 300. A radius of 8, do that to 5. Maybe increase the shot to 1,500. So that's the first emitter. We'll do the materials at the end. Now for the second emitter, we actually have a different symbol. And I think what this means is that it doesn't come straight from the emitters. If I click on it, if I go to actions and I click on the control spawning action, parameters to change, there's a spawning emitter option. And from here, if I click on add spawning emitter, you see it creates an emitter with that specific symbol. So since this emitter is created with the control spawning option, I'll activate the options, go back and play it. Now nothing is happening because I disabled the ceiling, but let me click on control spawning option, where in the object tab, the action type is set to direct actions. Direct actions is control spawning. I have no idea what this is. And it's pretty much doing the same thing. It's got a direct spawn. I don't know what all these parameters mean. This, activate that. Okay, I think it's time to activate the ceiling back on. I'm gonna go back, play it, and you can already see that it's sticking and doing that, but this is not falling because we don't have gravity activated. Okay, so it's time to activate the ceiling back on. Go back, play it, and there you go. Particles are sticking, they're bouncing, but they're not really hanging. So let me go to this XP collider tag that is in the ceiling. In the general properties, we have enable collisions. Bounce on collision is enabled. Self collision, it's got friction, it's got scatter, but it doesn't have any bounce. That doesn't make sense. Connect and collision is enabled. Connection limit is to 1. Stiffness is to 1. Now let me go to forces. No attraction, no repulsion. Reaction, no reaction. Spawn, nothing. Groups affected, nothing. Exclusions, nothing. Now what is interesting to me is that those yellow lines usually represent the constraints, which come from the dynamics, but we don't have any dynamics activated. So let me go to the emitter. I'll go to display, and it's displaying the constraints, but we don't have any constraints activated. So what I'm guessing is that in this XP collider tag, connect on collision is actually creating those constraints. So let me prove my theory. Let me deactivate it, go back, play it again. See what I tell you? So this is another way that I just learned how to create constraints with the XP collider tag. So let me activate it, play it again. Now since the connection limit is set to 1, this is why we only have one constraint created wherever that collision happened. And since those particles are bouncing, that point is created just right where it bounced. Let me see if I can get one of those by themselves. Yeah, so it's creating the point right here, but then the particle is bouncing down. Now it's creating that line toward the center of the particle, and our friction is on 88, 95. So let me change that to probably 31 just to see if the less friction we have, the more bounce is gonna happen. I think I can see it. Let me go lower. It's pretty much the same. So let me go back to 90. Scatter, let me change that to 50 just to see 50 to see what it does. Same thing. So now for the stiffness of connect and collision, it's set to 1, but if I set it to 69, they just stick there. So let me try 0.1, 0.01. Go back, and there you go. And they're gonna come back and gonna go. Okay. So maybe more like a 0.09. Just anything lower than 1. Play it. 0.95, 0.09. Play it. 0.09. Play it. Okay, 0.9. Okay, I like that better. Okay, so I'm gonna activate the modifiers now. Deactivate the XP negate just so I can deal with the gravity. Go back, press play. Whoa, and some of them already like fell down. I think it's too many. So let me go back to the emitter. Go back to emitting 1,000. Go back, play. They're still falling. So let me just keep it. Now for some reason those are falling, which is fine. I guess that's how it looks. So maybe I'll just make this emitter a bit larger so more particles can stick. I'll just make the ceiling way bigger so I can make that emitter pretty much the same size. I mean, they're still falling. And you know what? I'm actually just gonna change that object. Instead of a rectangle, let's just do a circle. Go back, play. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Make the radius to 200 centimeters. Go back, play. 500 centimeters. Go back, play. I'll stick with 300. Go back, press play. There you go. I like that. And now for the secret sauce, this XP negate seems to be where the name of the project comes from. So let me activate it. And in the object tab, it's asking for the action, which is this control spawning action that we created that emitter from. General mode set to independent. I don't know what all these is, but in the break constraints, we do have collisions with objects, so they break it based on the collision. Okay, groups affected, mapping, follow. Okay, so for that follow, we have a box field. Let me go back and press play. Moving and chopping. Okay, moving, scraping all those off, and yeah. Okay, let me try it again. Okay, so what are these white dots? Are those from the control spawning action? Okay, let me look at that emitter. Rectangle, emission, controlled only, control spawning action, direct spawn, those particle. Let me go back, play it again. So I think that the way this works is whenever this XP negate fall off box field comes in, basically deactivates those yellow lines, those constraints that are hanging those particles, and then uses the control spawning option to spawn those smaller rectangle particles, and they simply just fall off because we have gravity activated. So let me play it. Bouncing, bouncing, collision, collision comes in. Yes, you see it's deactivating some of those yellow constraints and then spawning particles as it goes. Wow, that is so complex now that I think about it. I would have never thought of this, so thank you Insidium for these project examples. Okay, and for the last thing, I'm gonna activate the generators, which we only have in XP trail, and you can see already when activated, we're gonna create those lines for the render system to actually see, because without the XP trails, even though we can see them here in the viewport, you're not gonna be able to see them in the rendering system. Yeah, it's complicated like that. So let me activate it back again, go back, and there shouldn't be a change. It should just be creating those lines so we can see them in the rendering system. The box comes in, chops them off, create particles, and that is our simulation. Now at the beginning I thought this was going to be smoke, but this is not a volume, this is just the field and the shape of a box. Okay, so at this point our simulation is pretty much ready, so I'm gonna start playing around with the rendering. And just to summarize it once again, we're shooting particles from this circle below, they're moving up, colliding with the ceiling, and whenever they collide, they create a constraint, or basically just a string at that same position that they collided on. Now once they bounce back, that constraint is constraining its position and it's bringing them back. See, it's hanging because of gravity, but it's eventually pulling them back up because of that constraint. So they keep bouncing because the constraint has some bounciness in it. It works as a spring. And then we have this XP negate coming in. I'm assuming that it's negating those constraints, deactivating them, just getting rid of them. So those particles just fall because there's nothing to hold them. Now those little white dots are particles being spawned with this control spawning option that whenever the negate destroys the constraints, it just spawns particles particles wherever that negation effect happened, I suppose. And that is pretty much it. I think that's a really cool effect. I can already think of a name for this composition. Something in the lines of like a reverse anti-gravity. What is it called when you cut the grass? Mown the lawn? English. But you get what I'm saying. Just imagine if this was grass hanging from the ceiling and it just got too long and you bring in your flying drone to cut the grass on your ceiling. It comes in and just chops it off. And it might sound a bit unrealistic at first, but Amazon just released a set of cameras that are basically just like flying drones, flying cameras. They're gonna be flying around your house, just monitoring, and they pretty much stay like a ceiling level. So it's not so different from this idea. And you can definitely quote me on this. We're gonna have hanging grass from the ceiling, and then some company's gonna come in and sell you flying drones cut your grass from the ceiling. But going back to the rendering, I activated my real-time preview and we already have a cool effect. Now we cannot see those spheres because there's no lighting in the environment. The light is actually coming from those trails bouncing on the ceiling, and this looks like an upside down mushroom system. Let me go ahead and activate the lighting in the environment. I'll move around a little bit. Zoom in. Let me move a little bit more. If the light is not hitting it directly, I'll just go to the camera, move it up a bit, maybe get a different angle, and I'll pick a spot where they're bouncing and chopping, maybe right here. And that is everything that is happening as far as rendering. This is the look that they promised, and I don't know, for some reason I thought this was like smoke coming in, but it's just the reflection of the ceiling. For my next step, I'm gonna go ahead and play around with the materials, the lighting, and just create a more unique composition for myself. I will not be using Cycles 4D to render this animation, even though it looks pretty cool, but there isn't enough reason for me to use it because I will always prefer Octane render. I'm just more comfortable with Octane render, and my only reason to use Cycles 4D is this particle info node. We have all this information available from that node that uses the particles to basically drive materials, but in this example we're not really using it. And once again, I already have a lot of materials, assets, and lighting for my Octane render. I like its denoising capabilities a little bit better than Cycles 4D, and I am just more comfortable with it. So let me play around with the simulation, the materials. I'll fast forward it and then we'll see what I'll come up with. Okay, so for this composition, I decided to go pretty aqua on the color scheme. And even though I didn't keep the subsurface for those hanging spheres, I used this green plexi material that adds some transparency and just a little bit of that subsurface scattering. For the ceiling, I went with this modern aluminum one, which is pretty reflective, and it does have some scratches displacement. For the smaller particles, I actually added a pink gold material, and for the constraints, I have a aluminum material. Now, because I rendered this with Octane, I had to add Octane object tags so it could see those spheres and it could see those constraints. So for these aqua spheres, I needed to create an XP generator, drag the XP emitter into it, and then create a sphere. So this way Octane could see those spheres. Otherwise, they're just particles. Now, for the smaller ones being generated by this XP emitter from the control spawning action, I added an Octane tag directly into the emitter, and in the particle rendering, I just enabled it to geometry and just created a separate sphere, which is what I have over here. Now for the XP trail, I added another object tag, and as you can see, it automatically detects that you can read it as hair. So just enable that, render as hair, set up the thickness of the root and the tip, and just add your material straight to the XP trail. And that is pretty much it. It doesn't look like much right now. So once that animation is done, you're gonna be able to see those strings just just like stretching and bouncing. And then the middle section is being shaved off by the XP Negate in that box field. Particles just falling down because of gravity. And I'll probably keep it around 256 samples or maybe 128 posted on social media just because it's gonna compress it anyway, so I don't need to render at that high quality. For the thumbnail, I am gonna render at 4096 samples, and that's what I think is necessary for those spheres to just bounce the light and refract it, and so the denoising doesn't just get rid of all the detail. Sorry, I just noticed that I was kinda out of focus, but that's okay. I'll leave my Instagram down in the description if you want to see how the final animation looks. But yeah, that is pretty much the unboxing of this project file, the Negate constraints break. I encourage everyone to just give it a shot, and any comments or suggestions, just let me know in the comments. Thank you.